right? If you put a whole bunch of this stuff on top of your soil and it disappears, it means it went in one end of something and came up the other end of something as some kind of manure. Even if that thing it went through is something you can't see. Hey, it's Rick here at MaritimeGardening.com, and I thought I'd do a video answering a viewer question. I did a video a couple years ago. Called Ruth Stout FAQ Asked and Answered. I think I'll put a link to it at the end. It was just a bunch of questions from viewers about Ruth Stout gardening that I didn't see a lot of answers out there too. Just my take on those questions. So I got another question, a pretty long, lengthy question from a viewer the other day. The viewer's name is Vivian. Rather than write an essay to answer that question, I thought I'd just do a video because I thought it was a pretty good question, and maybe some other people might benefit from the answer to it. So she says that, I'll paraphrase some of the stuff, but she's been gardening for 40 years and she's switching over to no-till, and she's built a couple raised beds. She's got a big garden, but she's built a couple raised beds, trying to learn no-till. One thing I didn't sort of pick up here is, it seems to me that your raised beds are no-till, but your garden that's on the ground, you call your big garden, which I assume is not raised beds, is not no-till. The whole thing can be no-till. You don't need a raised bed to have a no-till garden. That's some people seem to think that. I don't know if that's what you think. I'm not putting words in your mouth, but it seems like your raised bed are no-till, and your garden that isn't raised beds are just a till garden. You don't have to raise a bed for it to be a no-till garden. I know that wasn't your question, but I just thought it's implied in the way you've written this. Okay, but that's a useful thing to know, because I have lots of beds that are right at grade and they're no-till gardens. Anyway, she says, we have chickens, so last fall we had a lot of chicken manure from our garden coop, and we used all of it and tilled it into my big garden, which I assume she means not the raised beds, which I think are the no-tills. The garden seemed as good as usual. Now this year I decided, instead of buying something to top dress my raised beds, I guess she means she normally buys a bit of, nice organic soil to put on top of it, which I never do. I put a nice layer of chicken manure bedding, a combination of manure and bedding from the chicken coop, from our coop. We have 15 chickens. I put it on top of my raised beds and thought it was okay to leave it sit on top for the winter to do its thing. Now, after listening to you, I think, oh no, I screwed it up. It has snowed here like 8 inches already, but the ground is still not frozen. Do you think I'm okay to leave that top dressing on the beds and work it in before I plant in the spring? Or should I try to fork it in now over the snow? It really depends on how much chicken manure you've put on. If you put just an inch on, I just leave it. It'll be fine. I mean, the snow and the rain and the melting and the thaw, it's going to work all that stuff down into it over time anyway. But if you put 2, 3, 4 inches in, it's probably, a bit too much, and you probably should try to get it in there. And, if the ground's still not frozen, I'd do it now, right? Do it now and let it sort of do its thing over the winter. I guess speaking to that point, if you're a no-till gardener and you want to get out of, especially as you get older and older and older, it's a nice idea to think you don't have to do all the work of tilling every year, and you don't, right? But you do have to keep your beds mulched if you want, the magic to happen. But if you have a bed where, you think, oh, this bed needs an injection of really good, a super nutrient injection, then chicken manure is a good one. The chicken manure tends to have very few, if any, weed seeds in it, because the chicken just processes everything so well. So it's a great one. And years where I've used chicken manure, all I do is in the fall I put like half of an inch on it everywhere, like pixie dust, right? And then I put a mulch over that, right? Some leaves or grass or whatever I can get my hands on, chewed up weeds or whatever. But so just half an inch, you just put that on top. Put a little bit of mulch on there, and that's it. Your garden's ready for next year. Okay, that's all you need to do. Okay, but yeah, if you put a whole bunch on, that is so strong, right? I don't think you're, sure. I mean, over the course of the winter, it'll break down and lose a lot of its strength because it'll be rained on and snowed on and frozen and thawed and all that sort of stuff. So There's something to be said for that. I keep touching this because if I lose my connection, I'm far enough from my house right now that if I lose the connection, I won't get it back and I can't read the rest of the message. So I hope that answered that part of your question. If it's put a lot on, you better work it in. You should do it now if you can. And if you put it on really thin, just leave it. It'll be fine. And for future reference, if you're using chicken manure, just put like 1/2 inch on everywhere. And if you got 15 chickens, you're going to have chicken manure every year. Put it on this time of year, about 1/2 inch thick everywhere, and you don't have to till it anymore. Also, we raised 5 feeder pigs and have all the poop from their barn to deal with. I was going to try to lightly put it in my huge garden, the not raised bed, and till it in. Now it snowed. Nothing is tilled yet. If the weather breaks, should I put the pig manure on top of my garden one more time, or not use it at all? What do you think? What would you do? Yeah, so same basic approach, and I think you're speaking to a point I made in the Ruth Stout video where I said, if I was going to do things all over again, the whole idea of having a no-till garden is you don't till it. But if you've got a garden and you're going to make it a Ruth Stout garden, a no-till garden, it's just Ruth Stout's just another way of saying no-till garden, a garden you don't till. But you have a pile of manure, why not use it, right? And I said I would, if I had a big field and I wanted to turn that into a garden, I'd till it the first time and then I just wouldn't till it again. So I think that's what she's talking about. Yeah, I would, I would put that on and till it in if this is going to be your last tilling, right? Why not? And I would try to do it now, absolutely, right? The longer that stuff's sitting in the soil, I mean, you got to think about your soil, whatever the soil is, a raised bed or bed at grade or whatever. It's, there's soil, there's water, and then there's all the organisms that live in the soil. And the things you add to it are the food for that whole thing to happen, right? And if you're keeping your soil organisms happy, they're doing their thing, and that will always improve your soil, right? So even this time of year, if you're lucky, it seems like you're getting snow already. And if you're in, I don't know if you're in, she said she was in MN, capital N, capital N. So I don't know if she means Minnesota or Manitoba or Montana. I don't know where he's, or some other part of the world. I don't know exactly where that is. I'm going to guess Minnesota, but I could be wrong. I think Manitoba, the abbreviation's MA. Anyway, if you already got snow, and if you're in that kind of state where you get the snow and the snow stays and it just accumulates and it's basically the ground's covered in snow all winter long, it's very likely that underneath the snow your ground's going to not freeze too much. I mean, it really depends on how far north you are, right? Where I live here, the snow melts periodically throughout the winter and the ground freezes solid. But anyway, if you're in that magical sort of situation where you can, the snow comes down and it covers the ground and it really doesn't freeze that much, that means that all the soil organisms are going to be, to some extent, depending on the organism, right, they're going to be active all winter long. So you want to charge that up with some food to get them doing their thing. They're going to be moving around, they're going to be breaking that stuff down, they're going to be processing it, they're going to be tunneling and, doing all the good stuff that benefits your plants. So yeah, if you're going to till, I would do it now. And I think farmers sort of traditionally till in the fall as well. Put that pig manure on, till it up, get some sort of mulch on top of that. The snow's a good mulch, but really some sort of leaves or hay or something like that. Get a mulch on there, and next year just mulch and mulch and mulch and mulch and mulch. And you've got this you've got 2 excellent resources: chicken manure and pig manure. I would say you keep it all in a pile for future years, right? Because you're not going to need your tiller anymore if you want to become a no-till gardener. You don't need to till your garden. It's a hard thing to give up, right? It's almost like an addiction, but you don't need to do it. So if that's where you want to go, right, for future years, you've got chickens, you've got pigs, you're going to keep getting manure. Keep that all in a pile, and then around the fall, October, basically before freeze up, before things start to snow, when you're sort of done, your garden's done for the year. As soon as your garden's done, just distribute that manure on the top everywhere in your garden, but try to keep it no more than 1 inch, right? And then put your mulch on top of that, and over the winter it'll just do its thing and break down, and the different organisms will work away at it. And in the spring you'll have this unbelievably productive soil. So You know, traditionally we always till manures in, especially strong manures, because they're so strong. But if you only got a little bit, half an inch or an inch sort of thing, right? And you're doing it before the entire winter season where you've got rain and snow and ice and freeze and thaw and all that sort of stuff. A lot of the strength, meaning the nutrient density in that manure is going to be greatly decreased by April, May, when you're going to plant it in again, right? So if you can put it on thin, I keep saying I'm oscillating between half an inch and an inch. When I think back when I've done this and I've been successful and it's worked out great, just half an inch, right? So think about how much manure you need to cover everything with half an inch. That's about the right amount. You know, there's only so much nutrient you can add to your soil. Your plants need what they need, and if you have more nutrients than what they need, it's not going to do them any good, right? So there's really no point. So, you know, I would say the chicken manure is the best stuff, but you know, it's also the most likely to be weed free. But put on a half an inch of manure over your whole garden every fall if you've got that resource. I don't do that. I just use leaves and yard waste and things like that, and I'll talk about that in a second why that works. But if I have manure, I'd use it. If I had chickens, I'd put it on there. I'd just put a light layer over the whole thing. And any extra manure you have, why not sell it, right? Pig manure is a great fertilizer for a garden. Chicken manure is a great fertilizer for a garden, so why not sell it to people that want that? People will pay you for that stuff, right? And anyway, why don't I use manure at all? I mean, when I'm building a garden and I need, let's say I want to raise a bed, you know, my raised beds, I only raise them a few inches above grade, that's it. Every inch you add to that equation, raising a bed, you're creating a situation where it's harder and harder for your plants to reach the water where it is, right? The higher the thing is, you know, the water's in the ground. So the further you are from the ground, the more difficult it is for your plants to get to the water. So it's just a waste, you know, whatever you're building that raised bed out of wood, it's just you're just adding the cost of the wood, you're adding the need for inputs to get that height up and so on and so forth. So, you know, really a raised bed for me is, you know, 2 by 6 inches high, and it's about half full of soil, so, right? And often I'll use the hugelkultur method, which I've got videos on if you want to check out that. It's kind of a back-breaking thing to get started, but, you know, you only have to kind of do it once, maybe every 10 years, so it's another way to make soil out of nothing using rotten wood and stuff like that, right? But when I have built little raised beds like that, most of my beds are like that, I've used horse manure, because horse manure is the sort of weakest manure there is, so you can, if it's well composted, you can use it like soil. So I've used that, but that's really, it's been a number of years since I had any kind of manure in my garden at all. Mainly because the horse stable down the road kind of shut down, so I don't have it's not easy for me to get. I have to drive like half an hour to get it. It's just not worth it because it's not needed, and I'll tell you why it's not needed. Because if you are perpetually mulching your beds with stuff that the soil organisms can eat, right, break down, and I'm talking about the whole range of soil organisms, from worms down to things you can't see, right, to fungi and, you know, other, you know, really, really tiny things that you need a microscope to see. There's all kinds of stuff in there, and it's all acting on whatever source of nutrients there is. And if you're mulching your bed, that's the new source of nutrients, and it starts the whole chain of, you know, the different organisms interacting with one another. So they're moving around in your soil, making tiny little holes which your plant roots can get into, but they're also, you know, they're also creating their manure, right? If you put a whole bunch of this stuff on top of your soil and it disappears, it means it went in one end of something and came out the other end of something as some kind of manure. Even if that thing it went through is something you can't see, right? It's manure from that thing. So I actually am fertilizing my garden with manure. I'm just not doing any of the work, right? I'm putting plant matter on top. I like to put about 3 inches, you know, this time of year, because people are throwing it out. I like to use leaves, I like to use grass, I like to use things like that. But people are throwing out bags of bagged up leaves and stuff like that. I put it on top of my beds, and you know, by the spring, you know, maybe 30 to 50% of that stuff is sort of gone. It also gets pressed down and stuff, right? And then by the following, I usually sort of move that stuff around a little bit in the spring, and sometimes I'll take it right off the bed and put it aside and put it back on when the plants are a certain height. I use it in various ways. But every single one of my beds, every year, gets covered with about 3 inches of some kind of decaying plant matter. And every year, all that stuff disappears over the course of a year, right? So I'm adding to the soil every year. All that stuff is turning into, probably a 1/4 inch of insect and other organism manure, maybe even less, right? This much is turning into, you got this much mulch, and once it's done breaking down, it's just going to be the finest little layer of black stuff. It doesn't appear like that in the garden, but if you let it compost in some way, it would be the finest little layer of black stuff, black composted stuff, right? That's really all I'm adding to my garden. And I do it that way because it's just so easy, right? I don't have to turn it over in a compost pile. I don't have to do all that work. I just throw decaying plant matter of any kind on top of my garden, and all the things that live there, they're like, oh, thank you, we were waiting for our next installment of a year's worth of food, and they go to work on it. Some of them are eating it, some of them are eating the things that are eating it. They're all living, moving around, and stuff's going in one end, out the other end. Voila, manure. So that's why you don't need manure. But if you've got it, use it. Why not, right? So anyway, I hope that you found that interesting. That's my answer to your question. I hope that gives you some things to chew on. And, maybe in a year or so, you can get rid of that tiller because you don't need it. I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. Check out my podcast, maritimegardening.com. And until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.